Top 10 Rules on Baking a Successful Cake. If you are a cook who cannot resist throwing in a handful of this stuff and sprinkle it, you could find that baking can be a bit of a hit and a miss. Baking is a cooking area that does not have an artistic license. Everybody loves a homemade cake, but sometimes making a perfect, moist cake can be difficult. Most of us are familiar with the frustration of wasting hours measuring, stirring, and baking, but not having a cake in the middle or sticking to the pan just to crumble into pieces. Luckily, there are a few baking tips to make sure that your cakes come out sweet, fluffy, and delicious every time. In this video, we will reveal the secrets behind the production of these famous desserts. Start by putting your faith in packaged mixtures, and in no time, you'll be baking cakes from scratch. Number 1. Prepare all your items. Have all ingredients at room temperature, unless otherwise specified in the recipe. This makes it easier to mix the ingredients and it gives the cake a better diameter. Cold eggs can cause the batter to separate. To warm cold eggs, place them in warm water for about 10 minutes. Cold butter will not combine well with warm butter, so place the butter between 2 sheets of parchment paper and roll with a rolling pin until they're quite thin. If the recipe calls for cake flour and you don't have any at your fingertips, use 1 cup minus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour for each cup of cake flour. Most cake recipes call for cake flour as it provides a slightly more tender cake, but you'll find that all-purpose flour makes a fine cake too. To make sure that your cakes do not stick or fall apart when you take them out of the oven, grease and flour your cake until they are poured into the batter. Number 2. Use a good recipe. For guaranteed results, it is important to follow the baking recipes to the letter so that your cake can only be as good as the recipe that you are using. Start with a recipe from a source that you trust. A lot of recipes, particularly on the internet, have not been tested and tried. Use caster sugar, superfine sugar, for a finer texture. Use unsalted butter and, of course, fresh baking powder. Add cold nuts with a bit of sugar from the recipe to a food processor or a grinder and process until light and fluffy. The nuts should not be processed until the oils come out and it turns into a paste. Likewise, make sure that you are using an appropriate sized pan, unless otherwise noted. Don't substitute a 6-inch cake pan for a 9-inch cake pan, or a 9-inch round pan for a 9-inch square pan. You usually get away with swapping a 8-inch round cake pan for a 9-inch round cake pan, and vice versa. 8-inch cakes will take longer since they have to be thicker. But to prevent dense cakes, shrunken cakes, overflowing cakes, and flimsy cakes, use the correct sized pan. Number 3. Proper use of ingredients. Always weigh the flour before sitting. Don't pour all of your flour and milk at once. Instead, switch between adding the two. Just make sure that you start with flour because when the liquid is mixed into flour, gluten begins to form. Too much gluten makes a hard cake. So add some and then the other, starting and finishing with the flour. Baking parchment works really well for lining as it's non-stick. Softened flour-dusted butter or oil-dusted are also alternatives. If baking powder is going to be used, sift it together with the flour to ensure even distribution. The flour should be added last, combined gently but quickly and baked immediately before gluten strands begin to form. Don't use too much fat though, or fry the sides of the cake. If you've been cooking a cake for a long time, it's worth covering the outside of the tin with a brown paper and a string to stop those edges from burning. Number 4. Preheat the oven. Be sure to preheat your oven before baking. Otherwise, your cake will not rise properly. When you put a cake in the oven that isn't hot enough, it will influence the way that it rises. Fan ovens can dry a cake slightly so that the traditional setting can be used for a longer shelf life. Number 5. Be accurate with measurements and ingredients. Make sure that you use the same proportions and ingredients as is shown in your recipe. You cannot just add more baking flour if you want your cake to rise even higher, or substitute plain flour for self-raising flour. Use measuring spoons rather than regular old cutlery to ensure accuracy. Also, stop combining those imperial and metric units. Just select one or the other. Most recipes demand that the butter and eggs should be at room temperature. If you take the butter straight out of the refrigerator, it's not creamy, and those cold eggs may curdle the cake mixture. Number 6. Stick to cooking times. When you have used the correct tin and you have a decent oven, the timing of the recipe will be accurate. As the ovens differ, test your cake just before the end of the cooking time. The cake that is cooked through will feel the same whether it is pushed around the edges or in the center. Additionally, the skewer inserted into the middle will come out intact. If your cake is not cooked properly but looks rusty, you can cover it with some wet, grease-proof paper. Number 7. Cool down and freeze. Enable the cake to cool down on a rack in the pan for just 10 minutes. Then remove the cake from the pan and let it cool down. Before frosting, make sure that your cake is absolutely cool. Otherwise, your frosting is gonna melt. To freeze the uncooked cake, place it on a baking sheet and place it inside a freezer until firm. Place the cake in a plastic freezer bag or an airtight jar. Seal and then return it to the freezer. Unfrosted cakes can be frozen for up to 6 months, with fruit cakes that can be frozen for up to 12 months. Number 8. Clean up, quick, and store. Before frosting, place small pieces of waxed paper around and under the first layer of your cake on the pedestal or cake pan. Once you're finished, gently take the waxed paper out of a smudge-free cake tray. Whether you have leftovers of a cake with whipped cream, cream cheese, sour cream, or uncooked eggs in frosting or filling, it must be kept in the refrigerator. Number 9. Get as much air into the cake as you can. Creamy butter and sugar until the mixture is lightened in texture and color. It raises the volume and the air of the cake, giving a lighter product. Once the batter is in the pan, tap the cake pan on a countertop. Just release any large air bubbles that may be trapped inside the batter. Sift flour and other ingredients together to mix. Add air and make it easier to fold in. A large balloon whisk used gently is the best suited for folding. It helps to avoid lumps of flour, but does not, please, just do not overwork that mixture. Don't be tempted to whisk aggressively, because that is going to be heating up air and it will result in a heavy cake. Number 10. Once the cake mixture is made, put it straight into the oven. The raising agent will start working as soon as it comes into contact with any of the wet ingredients, so as to ensure a good rise of your cake mixture should go straight into the oven. Cakes are usually best put in the middle of a shelf for even cooking. As soon as the cake is in, stop opening the door until it is almost baked. If you allow that cold air into the oven, the cake is probably likely to collapse. you're going to need to wait until it is properly set before you take a look at it. Similarly, when you place a cake in the oven, don't hold on to it and let all the heat out. Also, if you use a convection oven, always reduce the oven temperature by 25 degrees Fahrenheit. It is best to reduce the baking time as well. For cookies, it's usually around 1 minute less. For cakes, cupcakes, bread, brownies, and other things, it's usually reduced to around 5 or so minutes. My recipes are written for conventional ovens. Thanks for watching. If you liked that video, hit the like button and share. And for more videos, please subscribe to our channel.